What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the College Football Show here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. I'm Noah Hiles. He's Andrew Destin. And Andrew, another week, another pair of victories for the two teams that we cover. And I got to tell you, I think for the first time all year long, I might have had the easier work week than you as far as Saturday goes. My game was over in 16 seconds.
Yeah, you definitely had me beat, and I was eventually going to say after I was there covering the game, wow, I had it easy this week. And then sure enough, I looked at Pitt and saw, wow, that's a heck of a first quarter. Okay, that one's done early. But I will say I was done with my work about midway through the second quarter, so I was behind you, but not terribly far behind.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wrote my lead to my story was it only took 16 seconds. And that applies both for Pitt's win and how long it took me to essentially write that story, because the game was, like I said, determined pretty early. But Pitt and Penn State both roll to pretty dominant victories. And we move forward. Again, we'll preview their upcoming matchups this week. You're going to Piscataway, is that correct?
That's correct. I'm going to be not terribly far away from where you're at right now.
I know. I'm coming to you live right now from Brooklyn, New York here, covering the Legends Classic for basketball. But for now, we'll keep with the college football talk. And Andrew, it's getting to that point of the year where next week, we can kind of review the end of the season or project, college conference championships and stuff. But the bowl game predictions, the projections, this is like bowl projection season, if you will. And I love reading the bowl projections. Adam Bittner, one of our coworkers, does a great job. He gets all the projections from every site, and for Penn State, for Pitt, and for West Virginia when they were at least having a chance to be bowl eligible. And you could read through them and kind of see, where are they going to go? Who would be these matchups? And I've always enjoyed looking at those. And I thought that would be a good way to start the show today. So just looking at Pitt's bowl projections, I mean, the Panthers are still wide open as far as bowl consideration goes. They are bowl eligible, obviously, with 6 wins. At worst case scenario, I see Pitt being in the Fenway Bowl, which is at Fenway Park, of course. I believe it's on December 17th, 11 a.m. kickoff, which would be interesting. Don't know if I've ever covered a game that early before. So that'll be something unique. But the two ones that I'm seeing the most and even hearing a little bit about are the Pinstripe Bowl and the Sun Bowl, two bowls that Pitt's more than familiar with. I know the Panthers Pat Narduzzi, I believe in his first season, played in the Pinstripe Bowl. That would be a Big Ten matchup, Purdue and Minnesota, two teams that I know you've seen this year, Andrew. Yep. And then the Sun Bowl, I've been hearing around at Pitt practices and everything that they might be in attendance Saturday afternoon for the Duke game, because I think the winner of Pitt-Duke will take pretty much second place of the Coastal Division in the ACC, and that might end up resulting in that second place team getting a bid to the Sun Bowl, which I think is a notable bowl. Pitt has played there twice, I believe, since 2008. They lost both times to Oregon State and Stanford. The teams looking at the standings there, I could see them drawing would be either Oregon State again or Washington, depending on how Washington finishes, which I think would be a very interesting draw. They're playing good football right now. And I could also see UCLA if they kind of continue to falter down the stretch here with, I believe they still have USC coming up here. And if their losses continue to pile up, maybe it would be a blue on gold Sun Bowl or blue and gold on blue and gold Sun Bowl. So those are just some of the projections that I'm seeing. Duke's Mayo Bowl, Cheez-It Bowl, Gator Bowl, some other things being thrown around for Pitt. Andrew, what are you seeing? What are you hearing for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, definitely a little bit less wide open for Penn State, and that's really due to the success that the Nittany Lions have had since losing to Ohio State and Michigan. Assuming things go to plan, which if you're Vegas, you're saying Penn State's going to beat Rutgers and Penn State's going to likely beat Michigan State. Though Sparty looks better and better every week. I'll give him credit. Gonna give him credit on that one. So, but assuming things hold up and Penn State gets to 10-2, I'm seeing 3 bowl games and 2 that are a little bit more likely than the last. To me, it's either going to be the Citrus Bowl or it's going to be the Cotton Bowl. And if it's the Cotton Bowl, I'm looking at a game against a Group of 5 team. Right now, the most likely candidate's looking like a UCF, and Penn State fans will be quite familiar with the Cotton Bowl. Penn State was in that back in 2019 when they played against Memphis, so that's one that stands out.
Was the Orange Bowl, what's his name, Benny Snell?
Yes.
No, or was that
No.
Kentucky? They played
No,
Kentucky
he
in
was
a bowl, didn't
Kentucky.
they?
That
Yeah.
that was the year before Benny Snell Citrus Bowl. Yes.
Okay.
Good memory jog on that one.
Look at that. You never know. Every now and then you hit those big bets and you remember
So,
Benny Snell won me money. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's
no.
just a
Benny
trip
Snell
down
and
memory lane.
and the other Josh Allen, the less
Yes.
notable of the Josh Allens.
Yes.
So that's one that stands out. Probably Cotton Bowl against a group of 5, likely UCF. And originally, a lot of people had pegged Penn State as, being that third place team in the Big Ten to likely go to the Orange Bowl. But the issue there is with Alabama's continual slide. Despite that, though, Alabama is still likely going to be ranked ahead of Penn State. And that's problematic when it comes from an Orange Bowl perspective. So Penn State fans who are looking to flock to Miami, it's going to take a little bit of help to get there from the playoff committee, AP, as well as just maybe a loss by Alabama or an Ole Miss. That would help their cause a lot because there's only so many spots to grow around. If you've got Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama and Ole Miss, these teams need New Year's Six bowls. And with the conference tie-ins that they have, they're more than likely to get that nod over a Penn State for the Orange Bowl. So that's one that, if possible, Penn State would be matched up against whoever comes out of the ACC, assuming they don't make the college football playoffs. So that could be a UNC, that could be a Clemson. But we'll just have to see on that one. The more likely bowl game, though, I see if Penn State doesn't get the Cotton Bowl would be the Citrus Bowl, a return back there from 2018. And similarly, that would be another SEC matchup. So if that's an Ole Miss, if that's an Alabama, whoever that could be, it could be a more interesting opponent than it would be in the Cotton Bowl against a group of 5 team. But, less stakes, right? Because it's not a true New Year's Six bowl, though it would be around that New Year's Day time frame. So those are probably the 3 bowls I'm seeing. And the more likely of those would be the Cotton Bowl. I think Penn State's probably looking at that one as a legitimate option, but we'll have to wait and see. The bowl projections never seem to match up for Penn State because they always like to get the Nittany Lion fans traveling out there and seem to get good attendance for the most part when games are in Florida. So who knows? It might be a Citrus Bowl on the horizon.
Pennsylvanians love a good trip to Florida
in
January or late December. There's nothing better. All right,
not sure about Dallas.
Probably not. I mean, I guess the Yinzers did take over Dallas for the Super Bowl, but I mean that's a little different than the Cotton Bowl in an era of the college football playoff existing. So now, Andrew, let's go into our matchups this week. 3 keys to the game. Penn State taking on Rutgers, the plucky little underdog who is still a Big East team in football, at least in my opinion, which is saying something because the Big East doesn't have football. I will say they are a Big Ten basketball program. They are legit in basketball, but we're talking football here. What are your 3 keys to this one? Is it just simply stay healthy, score more points than them, and don't piss anyone off? Is that as simple as it goes for them?
That's kind of the formula, right?
Right.
It seems like it for the Knicks when you're playing against a Rutgers or somebody like that. But I have to say, it feels like Groundhog Day covering this game coming up because you got Greg Schiano being the coach for Rutgers. It's like, what is it, 2008 again when Rutgers was high flying as a program, right? Feels a little interesting.
What were you covering college football in 2008? How old were you in 2008?
Would have been 9 years old watching College Game Day from my couch, but aware of Greg Schiano for God knows what reason when I was that age. But so I guess the 3 things that stand out to me, the first would be Sean Clifford being an efficient passer. It feels like something I've been saying all year, and Penn State has won in spite of his performances or guided by his performances. But last week against Maryland, he was only 12 of 23 for 129, his second lowest yardage output. And I know the weather wasn't great for the Maryland game, but got to be a little bit better than that. If that's the performance against Maryland, need better than that on the road against Rutgers. That's the case with a lot of these teams in the Big Ten East, like a Maryland, like a Rutgers. This is the Scarlet Knights Super Bowl. They're going to come out with, every trick, everything up their sleeve that they can possibly do to trip up Penn State's offense. And they're going to need Sean Clifford to at least be good early on. He wasn't good in the second half against Maryland, and it didn't matter because Penn State had built up a 27-point lead, but he's got to be better throwing the football. The second thing is getting the running game off and running again and establish time of possession on the road. And similarly, don't give Rutgers that hope. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton have been excellent runners all year long, being used in a 1-2 punch tandem. Get them going early. That's been a recipe for Penn State all year. As long as you feed them carries against a middling to less than average run defense for Rutgers, Penn State should be okay on the road. And there's a reason that they're 19.5-point favorites. It's not because of Sean Clifford. He's part of that formula, but it's the ability Penn State has to run the football. And the third thing is to keep the defensive wave against Rutgers going. Scarlet Knights, since joining the Big Ten in 2014, they've only scored 10 points against Penn State once. Other than that, it's been held under that. Keep the tradition going. Keep them in check.
Oh,
Just
boy.
hold them at bay. They shut them out last year when like 20 guys on the team were out with the flu. So it's Penn State likes to flex its dominance over Rutgers. Maybe we see that again here. And as so many Penn State fans like to point out on the road, where they'll all go into the opposing team student section and things like that. I don't know if we'll see that Saturday, but either way, just keep up the defensive wave. They had their first shutout of the year last week. I don't know if they get another one here, but stats would prove that Rutgers is going to have a hard time with scoring points. But how about you, Noah? What are you looking to this week?
I'm going to say 3 pick sixes on the first 3 plays this week. No, in all seriousness, I think actually my first key of the game for Duke is the inverse of what Pitt's defense did, and that's don't turn the ball over. Pitt, for the first time in ACC play, and only the second game this entire season, did not commit a turnover on the offensive side of the ball. And you just see how good the defense can be when you don't allow opposing offenses easy opportunities to put points up. And when you're committing those turnovers against quarterbacks like Hendon Hooker or Drake May, I mean, if you go down Pitt's schedule, they've played some really damn good quarterbacks. And, when you turn the ball over against those guys, or even, the next tier down, the Malik Cunninghams, the Jeff Simses, they're going to eventually make you pay. But when Pitt plays clean football on the offensive end, and that goes really to talk about Keaton Slovis and what he was able to do against Virginia last week, and just be a game manager. You don't have to be a hero. And if you can just play clean football, you allow your defense to really pin its ears back and be aggressive when a team starts their drive, when the opposing offense starts its drive in negative territory. And so that's the first key, is just you really got to see for the first time, literally, in ACC play, what a game could look like where the offense doesn't get these added advantages. And even if the defense doesn't come away with multiple touchdowns, which you can't expect to happen every single game, and even if it doesn't force any turnovers, which I think it has the capability of doing, just not giving the opposition easy opportunities makes it a lot easier to win football games. Another thing that will make it easier to win football games is if you continue to feed number 2. He sat out against help me out here. Who did they play? Oh, Syracuse. He sat out against Syracuse. Rodney Hammond Jr. came in and he played really well. And people were thinking, okay, well, what's it look like when they're both completely healthy? How do they get in the mix? For those who were wondering, for those who had any doubt, I mean, Izzy is the true number 1 back in this offense. You watch what he did against Virginia with Hammond there and available and everything. Izzy just runs the ball different than anyone else. I think he's one of the best running backs in the country. His numbers show that. He's still the ACC's leading rusher, despite really missing 2 full games and only rushing for 29 yards against West Virginia in the season opener. So just continue to feed him. That, again, will also limit the number of opportunities where there could be mistakes in the passing game, although I do think that that's slowly but surely coming along. But overall, feed the ball to number 2. Duke likes to run the football. Pitt likes to run the football. Pat Narduzzi previewed. He teased us with a 2.5-hour, 3-hour max game time for Saturday. I was like, don't do that, Pat. Don't get my hopes up. But it would be great if it happened. Last key here, and this doesn't necessarily go with winning and losing. I think Pitt should be able to take care of business pretty easily against Duke. So I'm going to include this one. It's senior day. Get the seniors involved. I love seeing that with everything that this group has been through. Dealing with the pandemic, seeing their teammates leave because of NIL stuff, the transfer portal, the guys who have stuck around long enough. And I'm talking about the guys, who aren't going to be starting. Your Nick Patties, get him a series on offense if the game gets to a couple scores. Someone like Miles Canton, a reserve linebacker, some guys like that who have still showed up to all the workouts, who, knew they weren't going to be starters or big contributors. But if the time calls for it, find an opportunity for them to get on the field and, really get a last hurrah to celebrate their time as a Pitt Panther. I would like to see that. And again, obviously, if the time calls for it. If it's a close game, then sorry, kid, maybe you'll get to play next week against Miami, which will be cool, Hard Rock Stadium. But those are my 3 keys. Andrew, we'll now move on to the final segment of the show where we talk some national football stuff. We got most of the conference championships are really lined up. We already got the ACC championship determined. We've got the SEC championship determined. Who cares about the Pac-12? It just eats itself every single year, and it continues to do that. It's just USC or nothing at that point. And the Big 12, I mean, the 6 schools that are still in it, who knows what's going on over there. So I'm just throwing out all kinds of disses today. But what I wanted to talk about, being in New York right now, Heisman Trophy race. And this right now, I think, is probably one of the more open Heisman Trophy races that we've seen in recent years. I think at this time last year, while in Pittsburgh, everyone was excited about Kenny Pickett at least having the shot to get an invite to New York, which he did receive one. It was pretty clear that it was the young man from Alabama who was going to win it. And it was another young man from Alabama who was going to win it the year prior. And before that, Joe Burrow had a dominant season. And before that, it was just every Oklahoma quarterback taking turns winning the Heisman. But this year, it seems like it's a pretty open race where Hendon Hooker was the front runner early on. Stroud from Ohio State's been around. But there's some other guys as well who have some late game matchups or late season matchups where a big game could not only get them a spot in New York, possibly get them a Heisman Trophy. So I want to start off by asking, Andrew, right now, just looking at how the rest of the season plays out, who are your 3 Heisman finalists and who's your Heisman Trophy winner?
Yeah, you had 2 of them right there, and I'll include a third name in Blake Corum. But, Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee, C.J. Stroud at Ohio State, and Blake Corum from Michigan. And been fortunate enough to cover games where I saw 2 of those 3 guys this year. And really, to me, I mean, it's a biased lens just because of how much Michigan dominated Penn State versus the tighter game that was Penn State, Ohio State. But to me, the guy right now that I'm looking at potentially, if he explodes on Saturday in the Michigan-Ohio State game, it's Blake Corum. I mean, he's as impressive as a running back as we've seen in college football. I'll make a bold statement and say he's my pick because if Michigan wins that game, they're going to lean on him, run the football down Ohio State's throat, and give it to Corum time and time again. And, man, there's been no player in college football who's been more consistent than Blake Corum. Hendon Hooker has had those Heisman moments, like when he played against Alabama, but he's also had clunker games where he's been sacked almost a dozen times like he did against Georgia. Or C.J. Stroud, where in bad weather against Northwestern, he completed like less than 50% of his passes. Or against Penn State, it took him a long time to get going. C.J. Stroud is great, but I think there's a legitimate argument to be made that maybe that's a benefactor of the talent around him, like a Marvin Harrison Jr., who is a phenomenal wideout. I don't need to tell anybody listening that that's the case. But to me, Blake Corum, the offensive line for Michigan is great. But what he does between the tackles, his vision, his speed, his strength, he's the guy that stands out to me. And I'm looking toward him for a big Heisman moment coming up in not too much time. Give it a week and a half, and we'll be talking about Michigan and Ohio State and that noon kick that everybody certainly looks forward to. And that's a spot that could be a huge Heisman moment for Corum in what's really the Big Ten championship game. Because what happens in Indianapolis is a foregone conclusion.
Right. And, it's funny you point to that one because a lot of people do believe that's a matchup that not only, like you said, it doesn't just determine a Big Ten champion. It likely determines one of the 4 spots in the college football playoff where Ohio State or Michigan, they could play the JV against Illinois in the Big Ten final. They're still, if they lose, those 1-loss teams still probably get the 4th spot in the playoff would be my guess. Yeah. An LSU win over Georgia might make things a little bit more complicated, but overall, I still think that game not only determines a Big Ten champion and college football playoff spot, but it also could determine the Heisman, where if Stroud has a great game, that seals it, in my opinion. I think he wins it. I do think there's a chance, like you said, where Michigan's running back could come in and if he dominates, runs for 200 yards, they ground and pound and beat Ohio State again like they did last year. That probably gets him to New York. I don't know if it necessarily gets him a win. A running back, it's tough to win the Heisman in today's NCAA, but that could do it. That really could. So you look at that, but I just think you look at matchups down the road, and if both of them play well and it's kind of a wash, Stroud and Corum, right, there's another guy who I think could not only get the invite to New York, but I think I might actually throw a couple bucks on him to win, and that's Drake May. You just look. Let's go through some hypotheticals. I think Hendon Hooker is a lock to be invited, as I do Stroud. I think those 2 are going to New York regardless. However, I don't think Hendon Hooker's winning right now, simply because the Georgia loss. And he's not going to have the opportunity. A lot of the Heisman voting really goes on, the big end season performance, and Hendon's not going to have that opportunity with his team not playing in the SEC title game. So I do think he'll have a chance to really, I do think Tennessee will probably get in the playoff. I would like to see that at least. So he'll have an opportunity to finish off on his great season, but I don't know if Hendon's probably going to win it. And like what you said about Stroud, Hendon's benefited from some really, really good receivers. Two of them that I think that we're going to look back like in the 2019 LSU with Jefferson and Chase. I don't know if those two guys are going to be as good as them, but we're going to look back and be like, man, they had some weapons. Yeah. Stroud, depending on the Michigan thing, that could go well, that could go poorly. The third guy, May, you look, Drake May's the best quarterback in the country. If I'm starting a team, NFL draft and everyone in the country is eligible, he's the first quarterback taken. I might take the young linebacker from LSU and the kid from Alabama who's going to probably go number 1 overall. They'd probably be 1 and 2 on my big board. But Drake May is, if I'm starting an offense, he's the best player that I've seen this year, and I've seen both Hendon Hooker and him this season. So I think that Drake May not only gets an invite to New York, but if you look at what he has a chance to do, he's going to be in the ACC title game. If he carves up Clemson and Ohio State doesn't play well against Michigan and Stroud kind of ruins his campaign of sorts, and Hooker doesn't have the opportunity to play in the SEC final, if May continues on this, run, he's going to get the same treatment that, a Manziel or a Jameis got when they're freshmen. People love when the young guy, the guy who comes out of nowhere and isn't supposed to win the thing, voters love that. Especially, like I said, the young guy. People hopped on the Jameis bandwagon late. They hopped on the Johnny Manziel bandwagon late. And while, those guys didn't really pan out as pros, they became elite college football players. And writers love a narrative, and finding that next up young guy late in the season, like what May has the opportunity to establish himself as, I could see him, like I said, getting to New York. And if they beat Clemson in dominant fashion, if he goes in there and he balls out like he's capable of doing, where he can run for a touchdown, he can throw for 4, and you compare his weapons and what he has to work with to what his competitors have to work with, that might get him some brownie points as well. So I like Drake May to get to New York and be a dark horse for the Heisman Trophy. That would be pretty cool. I don't know how many North Carolina Tar Heels have won Heisman trophies in the past. I like seeing some different uniforms up there on the stage, and that would be fun. Andrew, any final thoughts?
Just that, man, UNC's lucky to have a guy like Drake, and it helps having an older brother who went to the school too and was a pretty decent basketball player, I guess you could say.
Yeah, he hit one big shot, and he went to class afterward, and everyone, I had Kentucky in that game. All right, we'll see everyone next week. Thank you all for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and we'll keep the content coming.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.